Have you ever lived somewhere, surrounded by people, but felt completely alone? That was Maple Street. It was a beautiful street with perfect houses and green lawns, but the people who lived there might as well have been on different planets. They were separated by invisible walls of pride, fear, and old arguments. The Johnsons and the Garcias, neighbors for years, were locked in a silent feud over a few inches of land. Down the road, Mrs. Wright, a widow in her 80s, was incredibly lonely, but too proud to ever admit it. The Nguyens, a family who had recently moved to the country, felt like outsiders, their friendly smiles met with hurried glances. And then there was Tanya, a young single mom, overwhelmed and struggling, but too embarrassed to ask anyone for help. Each house on Maple Street was its own little island of sadness, and nobody knew, because nobody ever talked. They were strangers living side by side, their lives running in parallel, but never, ever crossing. Then one spring, everything changed. She appeared as if from nowhere, a calico cat with a coat of orange, black, and white spots. Each spot was unique, just like the people on Maple Street. She didn't have a name, not at first, but she decided this divided street was her home. But she didn't choose just one house, she chose all of them. They called her Patches. In the mornings, Patches would find her way into the Johnson's kitchen, purring and weaving around Mr. Johnson's legs as he sipped his coffee. A little while later, she'd be in the Garcia's backyard, chasing strings with their laughing children. Her afternoons were reserved for long, warm naps on Mrs. Wright's lap, her gentle purr filling the quiet house. In the evenings, she'd visit the Nguyens, who shared small, delicious pieces of fish with her. And late at night, when the world was asleep, she would curl up with Tanya, a furry shoulder to cry on after a long, difficult day. The funny thing was, nobody knew she visited everyone else. The Johnsons thought she was their cat. So did the Garcias. Mrs. Wright called her My Sweet Patches. To each family, she was their special secret, their own personal source of comfort and joy. And each one of them loved her with their whole heart. But one week, Patches was gone. The first day, no one thought much of it. Cats wander. But by the second day, a quiet worry started to creep in. The Johnsons checked their yard again and again. The Garcias called her name until their voices were hoarse. Mrs. Wright sat by her window, watching and waiting, unable to sleep. The Nguyens called for her in Vietnamese, their hopeful calls echoing down the silent street. Tanya's children cried themselves to sleep, asking where their furry friend had gone. The shared, unspoken anxiety hung heavy in the air. Finally, after a few more agonizing days, Mrs. Wright couldn't bear the silence any longer. She took a piece of paper and a marker, and in shaky handwriting she wrote, "Lost cat. Calico named Patches. Please help." She taped it to a stake and pushed it into her front lawn. It was a small act, a desperate plea into the void. But it worked. Within an hour, she heard a knock. It was the Garcias. "You know Patches too?" they asked, their faces a mix of hope and concern. "We've been looking everywhere for her." Before Mrs. Wright could even fully process this, another set of footsteps came up the walk. It was the Johnsons. The Garcias stiffened. The Johnsons stopped short. It was the first time they had spoken in 3 years. "We saw your sign," Mr. Johnson said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Is she your cat?" Just then, the Nguyens hurried over, followed by Tanya and her 2 teary-eyed kids. One by one, they all gathered on Mrs. Wright's small lawn, staring at each other in stunned silence. The truth slowly dawned on them. The cat they each cherished, the cat they each thought was theirs alone, belonged to all of them. And in that moment, standing together under the setting sun, united by their shared love and worry for one small animal, the invisible walls on Maple Street finally began to crumble. Something had to be done. For the first time ever, the neighbors of Maple Street came together to work as a team. They organized a search party. Mr. Johnson and Mr. Garcia, the 2 men who hadn't spoken in years, walked side by side down the alleyways, their voices joining together as they called out, "Patches, here, kitty kitty." Mrs. Wright, who hadn't had a guest in years, turned her kitchen into a command center, making sandwiches and pouring lemonade for the search party. Her house, once so quiet, was now filled with the sounds of a community coming to life. The Nguyen children joined Tanya's kids, and together they made colorful lost cat posters, taping them to every telephone pole and tree. They searched everywhere, fanning out through backyards and behind bushes. And as they searched, they talked. They shared stories about Patches, about their lives, about their worries. They laughed. They learned each other's names. They were no longer just houses on a street. They were people, connected by a common goal. And then they found her. A faint meow led them to an old, dilapidated shed behind an abandoned house. Patches was trapped inside, a little thinner and very scared, but she was alive. As they gently lifted her out, a wave of relief washed over the group. A cheer went up. Someone started crying. And then something truly magical happened. In the midst of the celebration, Mr. Johnson turned to Mr. Garcia and extended his hand. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "about the property line. It was a stupid thing to fight over." Mr. Garcia broke into a wide grin and shook his hand firmly. "I'm sorry too. Hey, you want to come over for dinner sometime?" The dam had broken. Mrs. Wright, beaming, invited everyone back to her house for tea and cake. The Nguyens shyly offered to cook a big meal for the whole street next weekend. Tanya, surrounded by friendly faces, finally found the courage to admit she was struggling, and in an instant, 5 different people offered to babysit, bring over meals, and just be there for her. All of this because of one little cat who saw no fences, only friends. After that day, Maple Street was reborn. It wasn't just a street anymore, it was a family. The Johnsons and the Garcias became inseparable. Their summer barbecues blending into one big party across their now open yards. Mrs. Wright's house became the heart of the neighborhood, and she was never lonely again. She always had a visitor, a fresh story, or a new batch of cookies to share. The Nguyens started teaching informal cooking classes in their backyard, and soon the whole street smelled of delicious spring rolls and pho. Tanya's kids gained a dozen honorary aunties and uncles, and she never felt alone again. They started traditions, block parties in the summer, a street-wide potluck for Thanksgiving, and a community garden where everyone worked together, their hands in the same soil. If someone got sick, meals would appear on their doorstep. If someone had something to celebrate, the whole street celebrated with them. And at the center of it all, wandering from home to home, was Patches, the little calico queen of Maple Street, reminding them every day of the bond they now shared, a bond built on her simple, unconditional love. Patches lived a long and happy life, 18 beautiful years. When she finally passed away, the entire neighborhood gathered in the community garden they had built together. It wasn't a sad day, not really. It was a day of gratitude. They planted a young maple tree in her honor, and at its base they placed a small, smooth stone. The inscription read, "Patches, the cat who built a neighborhood. She saw no fences, only family." Mrs. Wright, now in her 90s and leaning on Mr. Garcia's arm, spoke through tears. "I lived on this street for 40 years, she said, her voice trembling but clear. "And I never really knew my neighbors. Then this little cat showed up and she changed everything. She taught us that love doesn't respect property lines. She taught us that we're all connected, if we just open our doors." As the sun set, the people of Maple Street stood together, holding hands around the small tree that would grow for generations to come. They made a promise to each other and to the memory of their beloved cat, to keep loving the way Patches had shown them, freely, completely, and without any walls. The story of Patches reminds us that we are all so much more connected than we think. Sometimes it just takes one small act of love, one brave step, to build a bridge where there was once a wall. Maybe it's time we all tried to open our own doors. You never know what kind of family might be waiting on the other side. Thanks for watching.